The majority of Section 2.1 in the book is an introduction to the celestial sphere. The learning goals of this lecture are to describe the celestial sphere and locate the north and south celestial poles and the celestial equator, to understand that the celestial sphere is an imaginary globe and physical distances to stars vary greatly, and to understand that right ascension and declination are the coordinate system of the celestial sphere. The apparent motion of the stars across the sky is a direct result of the Earth's rotation on its axis. If you were to look down at the North Pole, you would see the Earth orbiting the Sun in a counterclockwise direction. You would also see the Earth spin on its axis in a counterclockwise direction. As a convenience, we can think of the sky as a large sphere centered on the Earth. This is called the celestial sphere. The celestial sphere is a useful tool for mapping the positions of the stars and objects in the sky. Each day, the celestial sphere appears to rotate around two poles. These are called the North Celestial Pole and the South Celestial Pole, and they are aligned with the Earth's north and south poles. Midway between the poles is the celestial equator. The celestial equator is directly above the Earth's equator. The celestial equator and the Earth's equator lie in the same plane. The path of the Sun over the course of the year is called the ecliptic. It crosses the celestial equator at an angle of 23.5 degrees because the Earth's axis is tilted 23.5 degrees from the plane of its orbit around the Sun. The Earth maintains this tilt as it orbits the Sun, such that at some points the North Pole is tilted toward the Sun, and sometimes it is pointed away from the Sun. The subject of the next learning module is the Earth's orbital motion. This module focuses just on the spin. The lines of declination on the celestial sphere correspond to the lines of latitude on Earth. The declination of the star is measured in degrees north or south of the celestial equator, just like the latitude of a position on Earth is measured in degrees north or south of the equator. Betelgeuse, for example, has a declination of 7 degrees and 24 minutes. The lines of longitude on Earth and the lines of right ascension on the celestial sphere are great circles that run from the North Pole to the South Pole. Right ascension is measured in hours or degrees eastward from the position of the Sun at vernal equinox. That's the spring equinox. Betelgeuse has a right ascension of 5 hours and 52 minutes. On a clear night, we can see about 3,000 stars. There are nearly 6,000 stars visible to unaided eyes for both hemispheres. It is human nature to connect the dots and see patterns even where none exists. The ancient Greeks thought that the stars rotated around the Earth, and when they viewed these constellations, they imagined pictures of animals and gods. This is the constellation Cassiopeia, named after the vain queen in Greek mythology, married to King Cepheus, the ruler of Ethiopia and the mother of Princess Andromeda. Cassiopeia, according to myth, boasted about her own unrivaled beauty and said that her daughter was more charismatic than the sea nymphs. For this she was punished by the gods and placed in the heavens. On her throne she was forced to wheel around the North Celestial Pole, spending half of her time clinging to it so she didn't fall off. Poseidon decreed that Andromeda be bound to a rock to be eaten by Cetus, the whale, but she was rescued by her hero Perseus, whom she later married. Cassiopeia looks like the letter W, and all these stories are told in constellations. Most bright stars have Arabic names, since Islamic scholars kept the Greek traditions of star cataloging alive during the Dark Ages. The individual stars in a constellation are often referred to by their Bayer designation. Here a specific star is identified by a Greek letter followed by the genitive, that is the possessive form of its parent constellation's Latin name. Let's consider the bright stars of Cassiopeia. Alpha Cassiopeiae, traditionally Shedder from the Arabic al-Sadr, meaning the breast, is a double star. Beta Cassiopeiae is Kaf, meaning hand, is a white-hued star of magnitude 2.3, 54 light-years from Earth. Gamma Cassiopeiae is a shell star, which is a type of a variable star that has a high rate of rotation. This causes the star to be somewhat unstable and periodically eject rings of material. Blue-white Delta Cassiopeiae has about 100 light-years from Earth, is also known as Rachba or Rachbat, meaning knee. It is an algal type eclipsing variable star. Its brightness varies noticeably and periodically every 2 years and 1 month. Despite having anatomical names, different constellation artists depict the queen in different orientations. So you need to use care when orienting with a graphic picture of a constellation. Ursa Major, the Big Bear, is also a constellation in the Northern Hemisphere. An asterism is a grouping of stars that is easily recognized. The Big Dipper is an asterism in Ursa Major. Historically, constellations are patterns of bright stars. Today, astronomers define regions in the sky by constellations on a spherical surface known as the celestial sphere. Constellations provide a convenient means for astronomers to specify large areas of the sky, much like geologists use continents or politicians use countries for voting and precincts to identify regions on Earth. There are 88 constellations. Viewed from the poles, the stars appear to rotate above the observer. All the stars are always on the horizon, and no stars rise and set. An observer at Earth's North Pole would see half the celestial sphere. This is called the North Celestial Hemisphere. The South Celestial Hemisphere would always be below the horizon for that observer. The North Celestial Pole would always be at the observer's zenith. That's straight above the observer. The stars rotate counterclockwise around the North Celestial Pole. No star rises or sets, as all are always above the horizon. Looking up from the North Pole, directly overhead is Polaris. As the Earth spins, the constellations around Polaris appear to rotate counterclockwise. Some stars are circumpolar, always above the horizon. Some rise and set, and some stars never rise. They're always below the horizon for any view that is at a mid-latitude. Figure 2.7 shows the location of Polaris and the rotation of the constellations that surround it for 2 different latitudes. There are more circumpolar stars at higher latitudes, and at lower latitudes, more stars rise and set. From the North Pole, all stars are circumpolar stars. Likewise, at the South Pole, the South Celestial Pole would be directly overhead, and all the stars would be circumpolar. The stars rotate clockwise around the South Celestial Pole. Between the poles and the equator, at some mid-latitude, one pole is above the horizon, but not at the zenith, while the other pole is below the horizon. Only equatorial observers see both poles. The North Pole is only above the horizon for northern observers, and the South Pole is above the horizon for southern observers. At Earth's equator, an observer with an unobstructed view would see all the stars rise and set. None of the stars would be circumpolar. All the stars are rise-set stars. The celestial poles are located at the observer's north and south horizons. At any one instant, half of the celestial sphere is seen. Over the course of the day, an observer at the equator can see the entire celestial sphere. In Nashua, New Hampshire, the circumpolar constellations include Ursa Major, which is Big Bear and includes the asterism Big Dipper, Ursa Minor, which is the Little Bear and includes the asterism Little Dipper, Cassiopeia, the Queen of Ethiopia, Cepheus, the King of Ethiopia, and Draco the Dragon. There's some astro tours in your learning module on Blackboard that correspond to section 2.1 and are referenced in that book. It's highly recommended that you go through them. The ancient Greeks, like Aristotle, thought that the stars were fixed in their positions on the celestial sphere. They believed they were all the same distance from Earth. However, stars that appear close in the sky may not actually be close in space. The distances to bright stars in the constellation Orion are shown below. The links in this chapter resources include a link to the Big Dipper 3D app. Use the tool to see how the stars in the Big Dipper are not close to each other in space. Just as stars have apparent motion that is different from their inherent motion, they have an apparent size that is different from their inherent size, and an apparent brightness that is different from their inherent luminosity. The factors that lead to observed size and brightness are distance to the object, absolute brightness of the object, transmission of the atmosphere, the wavelengths that you're observing at, and optical illusions, and refraction. The moon illusion is one optical illusion. The moon appears larger when it is near the horizon than when it is up in the sky. Some people say that if you bend over and look through your legs, the moon will look just as small. If you look at it from that vantage point, you're disoriented from the horizon and you don't have that reference that makes it look larger. On a clear moonless night away from city lights, with a pair of quality binoculars, you can see Andromeda traced out to an angular size of 4 degrees. To give you a comparison, the full moon has an angular size of just about half a degree. This figure shows the apparent sizes of various deep space objects. If they were brighter, this is how they would appear in our night sky. The images are in scale with one another, including the moon, but not to the Milky Way in the background. However, this would be what the night sky would look like if other planets were as close as the moon. They would be quite large. The moon is about 60 Earth radii away. This is what it would look like if the Orion Nebula were 4 light years away. In summary, the celestial sphere is, as the book writes, useful fiction for thinking about the appearance and apparent motions of stars in the sky. The imaginary sphere is centered on the Earth and allows us to ignore temporarily the complication that stars are not all located at the same distance from Earth. The sphere's coordinate system of right ascension and declination allow us to map the heavens. The Earth's equator and the celestial equator lie in the same plane. The ecliptic is the apparent path of the sun against the field of stars throughout the course of a year. In the next few learning modules, we'll be using the celestial sphere to better understand the motions of the sun, moon, planets, and stars.